And good evening, this is the Rutland Town Planning Commission. It is March 12th, 2020. Welcome everyone, and let's start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
Stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty for all.
Hopefully everybody has a copy of the agenda. We're a little spread out here tonight, but Mary Beth is part of the meeting as well back there. She's had a sick young'un, so she wants to be very cautious. So the agenda looks, I think everything is the Act 250 application here, Bill, for the Northwood Park.
We'll get a copy of it.
If not, we can look at it, but I think everything else is in order there. Anyone want to make a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. We'll skip through public comment and move right down to our main event this evening.
Move we adjourn.
Norm, you can leave anytime. We have a quorum, so just keep it up. So our main event is Jim Donovan, and you drove down from Charlotte, and you are the executive or the director of Broadreach Design and Planning.
Yeah, I am.
You are.
Design.
And your group, you work with some other groups, but you were the lead group in doing the smart growth study back in 2016.
16 days when it was finished.
Yeah. So Jim's here to answer any of our questions, to review anything from that study that we don't quite understand, and I gave him the evaluation we did. I think that was last year. We might have started in 2018. It took a long time. It was a rather painstaking process, Jim, to do the evaluation we did. But we picked those 9 criteria, and then we weighted them, and then that's how we came up with the scores on pages 3 and 4. So I guess we could start with just going down that list, starting, with the ones that rank the highest, and talk to you a little bit about, what the town's next steps could be with those projects. I should back up and just, if you have some introductory or overarching comments.
I did not. I figured I'd wait and see what you wanted to talk about.
Okay. So if that's okay,
Excuse me, Barbara.
yeah.
Is there any way we could move that microphone over to him
Just turn it. I'll just turn it.
from there, or
and Chinese government. You cannot say Wuhan coronavirus. Wuhan coronavirus.
How's that?
thank you.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we, yes, what do you,
What document are you looking at? I have the final report. But that's
we got the
not,
final report, and I think you were also sent this, the evaluation that we did that looks like
And I
this.
could not print that. I don't know if
You
there's
couldn't
any
print it.
copy.
I think I might have just one other
Yes.
copy.
I have it.
Oh, got 2 copies. Sherman, do you need one?
No, I have it. Thank you.
Jim, we did conclude after doing the evaluation that there were some themes that kept popping up with the high-scoring projects. And that's on page 2, at the very bottom, the conclusions. To build on Center Rutland's Village Center and Gateway features. And then the next one is begin to extend the Village Center westward with a focus on mixed use. Continue to work with West Rutland on ways to link projects and a need to pursue grants. And that would be another topic for tonight, if you have any ideas for the town or what might be out there for grants right now. And a little more background, there has been some activity at the Flory Plaza. Do you remember that area?
Yes, and I drove the corridor quickly and I noted that this evening, that something seemed to be happening.
Yeah, very slowly. There is supposed to be a family activity or family sport kind of center there. Eventually, they're still rehabbing the building, which had some asbestos. And it seems to be kind of a parking lot for some trucks and trailers right now. I'm not quite sure what that's all about, but
It's their equipment.
it is, okay.
What?
It's all their stuff.
So if we look at the highest scoring things that we came up with, and this was just the planning commission, and then we presented this to the select board, and they said, thank you. And they've been working on the public park off Simons and Old Falls Road. There's a committee that's been meeting, and there have been discussions with Green Mountain Power about probably transferring some land ownership there. So that's the only one that's really gotten any traction at all. Also, I keep backing up, sorry, Business Route 4 is slated to be paved this year.
They're gonna start preliminary work in April
But you
1st,
have almost
so,
a
yeah.
daily
like,
press event with the vice president.
Nothing's going to change with the traffic patterns there.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that the likelihood of reducing the number of lanes is not very high.
That's dead. That's dead. Both select boards said, both select boards, Rutland Town and West Rutland, said no to it.
Yeah.
That's the provision.
I always like to think that it's dead for now.
So this paving season is dead.
Right, and it might come back again
Yeah.
next time around.
Yeah. And as part of that, that's when the crosswalk is going to go in. They're just
Okay.
outside the building here. There'll be one across the street over to the cemetery area. That's part of the paving. So the highest scores went to adding street trees and other traffic calming measures to Center Rutland. That's the CR. And then the BR is the Business Route 4, and adding street trees and other calming elements to that area. We looked at just Center Rutland and the stretch of highway between the two towns.
Right.
We didn't look at West Rutland for obvious reasons. Then we do the park, and remind me, do you remember if your recommendation for that park along Otter Creek, was there also a mention that it would be on both sides of Business Route 4, or that?
We recommended that it be on the south side with the potential that it could go on the north side because you can go underneath Route 4 and expand it that way and just use more of that area if it works out.
And then there's also the trail section ideas there came from another study
Right.
There's the unifying theme along Business Route 4 that scored pretty highly along the whole business route using marble. Also scoring highly was a shared use path along the Clarendon River, along the whole strip. There's the Flory Plaza, a wayfinding system, some more trail sections if possible. And those were pretty much the top candidates that we saw. There was one we didn't have, the group decided there wasn't enough information and a feasibility study was needed, and that was the last one listed here, adding
Right.
a community center to this building.
Which I recall came up rather late in the overall discussion. But when we were presenting all the different alternatives, it actually ranked pretty high. So that's why it was kept in.
Okay,
But we didn't look at very much into the whole issue, all the issues behind it.
right. So of those recommendations we just ran through, what would be your off-the-cuff response to those, or advice to us?
I think the adding the street trees and other traffic calming elements out here in Center Rutland would be a great start. I'm not sure that you want to proceed with street trees out further on Route 4 at the moment, because there's other things here that could potentially change it a bit when you're talking about either modifying it to add the bicycle lane, which I think was down at under C1, if I recall, was pretty much saying narrow it down and put in a bicycle lane. Until you know what's going to be happening with that long term, you may want to wait. Unless you're absolutely positive that no matter what happens, the pavement itself will stay the same, then you could start with some street trees.
Funding for street trees, is there money out there, or is that something the town would have to come up with?
There is money. The Urban and Community Forestry Program has grants that can be used for street tree planting, I believe. They can. And I've heard of a few more, but they're not, I don't have them on the top of my head, but I'll see what I can find and send it back to you.
And hopefully they'd be a little more mature than what the city did just east of here, with those saplings that never seem to get beyond sapling stage.
That's one of the issues with street trees, is that if they're not strong enough to begin with, it's really hard for them to get going. The other part too is that they really need a good soil base. If you do not plant them in good soil, they won't ever grow. So you have to make sure that if they're going fairly close to the road, the soil that you're planting them in, maybe it might require taking out some of what's there. It could be all very gravelly and not very good for growing, and create a spot for them to grow, preferably more than like a 3-foot square, because then that's sort of like putting it in a planter, because it won't grow outside of that square, and so if it doesn't have a good root system, again, it won't grow very well.
And does the commission have a good idea why trees are a calming effect, or have a calming effect? Maybe you can explain that a little bit, Jim.
Ultimately, when the street trees go in, when they first go in, they have no effect. It's more of a long-term plan. As they get larger and they begin to create some sort of a barrier, it creates a slightly narrower feeling on the road, and when the road is narrower, you naturally drive a little bit slower. The older they get, the more effect that has. And in really old communities that have really nice old grand street trees, it's sort of like going in a tunnel, and you don't drive as fast when your vision is restricted. That's basically the theory, and that it's been tested a lot of times. Not to say that every single road acts the same way, but in general, creating that enclosure along the road begins to slow people down.
What other traffic calming? Did you have some other ideas for this area?
I think that we talked about narrowing the lanes. If I recall, there was enough room. I think we had a cross section in here. Narrowing the road enough to put in a bicycle lane, I believe. Let me see what we've got here. This is CR7. West Rutland, CR2, CR6.
The paving will come up.
No, I'm sorry, that was adding bicycle facilities. It was CR6 that I'm thinking of that had the cross section.
The paving will go to the city.
Right to here, it's gonna be right up, like just, I think it's gonna be just past the driveway.
Basically narrowing down the travel lanes to try to get wider shoulders on there. Again, it has the same effect. If you have a narrower lane to drive in, it tends to slow you down. That's why it's not easy to drive 40 miles an hour when you get out on Business Route 4, because those lanes are so wide and the road is so wide open, you feel like you should be driving faster. So the narrower the lanes are, the more you feel like you shouldn't be going fast, because there's not a lot of room for you to move around and it's very tight. And that other lane of traffic is sort of a little bit closer to you as well, even though there are lines there. So that begins to slow people down. If you're putting the crosswalk, eventually trying to narrow that crosswalk as much as possible by putting in what are called bulb outs, either with curbs or without curbs, that move where the pedestrians stand closer to the road, closer to the travel lanes. And then that begins to be another thing that narrows down the travel lanes, even if it's for a short distance. I'm trying to think of some examples. Nothing is coming to mind, naturally. Burlington just put in a whole bunch of them, and I know in Danville there's some. If anybody's ever been on Route 2 heading way up, Danville did a major project, and they have a lot of bulb outs there, where they basically have parking, and then it comes out to eliminate that parking. The sidewalk sticks out, like perpendicular to the main sidewalk. And,
Downtown Rutland.
pardon?
Strong's Avenue in Rutland has it.
Do they? Okay, that could be, because I haven't been down there for a while.
Yeah.
So it narrows things down and makes traffic go slower.
Burlington had an issue, I don't know if you remember this, what it was, about a month ago maybe. There was a 90-degree turn that the traffic had to go on, and they had planned some planning, and they abandoned it. I don't know if anybody else saw it or not. It was on TV quite a bit. It was downtown Burlington, I guess. I don't know what the streets were, but
I'm not familiar with it.
yeah, I mean, there was a lot of shouting and hollering, and I think it was the group. I'm not really sure what it all was about, but they undid what they were doing. I don't know if they were putting pump outs in or what they were doing, but it was really causing.
No, I didn't see it.
No, I saw it. I guess I'm the only one that saw it. But anyways, I just thought maybe somebody might have seen something on that.
So would the bump outs take part of the ones we talked about here? Would that go out into the bicycle lane? Is that what?
If you're having bicycle lanes, you might want to have them in closer. One of the cross sections that was suggested was actually putting a small little sort of like a median between the travel lane and the bicycle lane, and you'd almost have sort of like a crosswalk across the bicycle lane out to the edge, so that they would interact, but there wouldn't be a physical bump out. It would be more like a painted one to a place to stand out at the edge, so that the bicycle lane wouldn't be interrupted if you go along to having the bicycle lanes. But you might at the outer edge try to put, even if it's the road foreman would love these, having something out at the edge that serves as protection for the pedestrian, But things like that become an issue when you're snow plowing in the winter. So you got to make sure that when you're designing it, you can still do all the snow plowing that you want. So if you end up being able to get bicycle lanes and the crosswalks, you may want to do it all with paint so that it doesn't create an issue in the winter.
Have you had any other ideas since you did the study about using this area as a gateway or
Quite honestly,
fine.
no, because I haven't thought about that much. The fact of having just the trees, for one, and creating a nicer streetscape with the trees, if nothing else, creates more of a gateway area and makes this more of a noticeable location, as opposed to something you just want to drive through quickly.
right? Yeah, Maribeth, yeah.
Can we talk a little more about the shared use path idea along the river? Because it sounds like the road, using the road for walking, biking, might not work in this at this time, but what about the shared use path?
The best way to provide for people trying to use bicycles more is to accommodate all the different types of users, and some of them really want to be on the road. And you've got enough road out there that you could narrow each lane by a foot. Those lanes would still be big, and you've got the huge shoulder. You could easily put bike lanes on that road without, just by paint. And potentially you might still be able to get some paint changes, which really wouldn't change anything in terms of the repaving. And that accommodates one type. The other type was the off-road path, the shared use path. We very preliminary looked at it, whatever, looked at it, but we didn't go into that in detail because the other study was going to be starting when we were ending. And so we left that to them to look at in more detail in terms of what all the issues would be about putting that path along the edge. We did talk to one or two property owners. They said, yeah, it seems like it might work. Again, just because of a thought, there was no commitment of any sort, but they weren't saying, no, forget it at all. But you couldn't maintain it all the way because of the way the river moves. So there was one portion, I think, further west where you do have to come back in and you're almost either right next to the road or on the road because the river comes up close. But we felt that would make, one, a nicer way for people to get between the two towns, two, a nice recreation ride, and three, potentially some economic development because it would be a nice ride along the river that could attract other people to the area to do the ride.
So full disclosure,
safer.
I'm
Oh,
a
I'm sorry.
runner, and I drive to West Rutland to go running because they have really nice sidewalks. And it would be really nice because they live right up the road. I just don't like running along the road because of the cars.
Right,
and-
exactly. And that's why even if you put one on the road, you might be able to narrow it in enough that you're out at the far edge that it wouldn't feel so bad. But still, a lot of people would not be comfortable, even with that.
Because people don't go 40.
Right. When you go 40 in that road, you sort of create a backup lots of times.
That's speed control, though. I mean, go to Proctor, drive through Proctor at 35 miles an hour, and 9 chances out of 10 you're going to get a ticket. Because their speed limit is 25.
Right.
It's been that way for years and years. I mean, it's speed control that you really got to control, but the city's talking about reducing speed in downtown, especially downtown. And I mean, I don't care what you have out there for a road. People are going to drive, some of them are going to drive like crazy no matter what it is, but the speed limit should have a lot to do with it, I think. They have it all for safety. And that's what it's all about, is safety. Safety for the bikers, safety for the automobiles.
So is there some sort of like criteria that denotes the size of a bike lane that it just seems like and I know a lot of bikers that use that often, and one of the things that I heard most often from them was, don't sink your money into that road. If it gets cleaned up, put it somewhere else, because you can bike readily on that road. So, understanding their point, what's the criteria to even shrink a lane by a foot? There's still not enough room on that shoulder. I mean, what denotes a bike lane?
No, you want to, ideally, you'd like to maintain a shoulder. And so if you want to maintain the shoulder, and then you could put the bike lanes on the outer edge, so you've got the lanes, and then you've got the shoulder as a separator, and then you've got the lane. And
That's why that foot could kind of be important.
Right, yeah. And then you could narrow the shoulder a bit as well, because it's such a wide shoulder.
Right.
But 4 feet is usually about the minimum you want for a bicycle lane, going in one direction. 5 feet would be better.
Yeah.
But you could get 2 feet out of each of the lanes, and then 2 feet out of the shoulder to give you 4 feet.
Yeah. It's separate.
That's separate, so you've got that shoulder between you and the traffic.
So is that Business Route 4 you meant, or right here?
No, this area is really tight, in my
Right,
opinion.
this is tight, but
I was talking
It
about
is
business
tight,
route
yeah.
four.
out there, there's really
Right.
There's a lot of
a
room.
lot of trash.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
And I would agree that there's a lot of room out there, and that even just keeping it clean would be better than
Right.
nothing.
Right. And that was their biggest complaint, those guys. They said if it was cleaned up,
And that's often the case when you have a larger road like that, everything goes
Agreed.
over the shoulder, and that becomes really hard to ride. So you've got to move in closer to the lanes in order to have a smooth ride.
right.
That you're not riding over junk that might puncture your tires or knock you off a bike or something
Right.
else.
As you enter West Rutland, there is a section where it ends virtually.
Yeah.
You end up in the right lane.
Yeah.
That marble structure, that marble truss.
No, at the end near there's
Near
a
the-
turn for the railroad. The first turn into West Rutland. In order to get to it, you have to get back into the traffic lane for, I don't know, 30 feet or so, and then get out.
Yeah, I'm interested in the biking aspect. And, I've biked around here for 25 years, and maybe more. And Business Route 4 is just, it's like your friend said, it's just not clear. And we did it last summer, Sherman and I did, and it was very rough. Maybe when we did it too. It was almost discouraging. And and this was the middle of the summer and it hadn't been cleaned up. And I don't know how it can be kept clean. I'm more impressed, if I understand what you're saying, is there would be a modest shrinkage of a lane, a shoulder, some kind of barrier, and then a bike lane.
The barrier might be optional, but it would at least be painted. Ideally, you'd have a barrier, but at the minimum, you'd have it painted so that there's a lane. And unfortunately, that wouldn't necessarily keep the stuff off, because getting the barrier would sort of change the paving to be more than paving.
One of the concerns articulated as we did this was the potential interference with traffic in and out of the businesses along Route 4A. If there was a very defined bike lane and increased traffic and that kind of thing. Just something to think about.
Typically, riding on the road is not an issue in terms of, I shouldn't say not an issue, but it's not a large safety issue, because as people are coming out of roadways or out of driveways, they're looking on the road, and that's where the bicyclist is. It's when there's a shared use path that might be slightly off the road that crosses the driveway where you have a significantly larger problem, because people aren't looking there, they're looking at the road and not looking at who might be riding on the shared use path. So statistically, while there are crashes, they're not nearly as many as people would think, when people are riding on the road in terms of driveways and bicyclists coming back and forth, because they're looking for traffic as they come out to the edge of the driveway. So the bicyclist is in that field of vision.
Or one final question, if I may. We talked about a shared route path along the creek and then coming up. And then we're talking about a bike path along Route 4A from one side, West Rutland here. Are those mutually exclusive?
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, you should do one or the other, but not both?
Yeah.
No, definitely not. The best type of systems are the systems that will accommodate people that really do not want to be on a shared use path. They want to go the fastest, and they're there for transportation, and they want to go from A to B as quick as they can, and that's typically the road. But then you have a much larger group of people that will not ride because they're afraid of riding on the road. And so the off-road trail accommodates them. And so the best system has both. So ideally, you want to have both.
Did your ideas for a shared use path, wasn't that along the Clarendon River?
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
behind most of the businesses?
It was behind the businesses, right. So it wasn't one, I was the one that was doing most of the bicycle work in the project, so I say I, but it was the team, but it was mostly me.
Being a cyclist yourself,
Right, and, well, that's what my company does, is bicycle and pedestrian work primarily. Putting one right next to the road really doesn't give you that much difference. It does get people off the road, but then you create that issue of the driveways and the businesses where you're moving somebody off, and when somebody is entering or leaving that business, they don't stop at the shared use path, they go right across it over to the driveway. Or if they're turning in, they're watching the traffic this way, they see an opening and they come in, and then they see somebody here, but they can't stop because they're on the road, and so it creates a much bigger issue. So I would never recommend a shared use path right off the road here. You definitely want it away, and so the idea was to put it in the back. And then that also gives you better recreational value and better economic development value at the same time.
Sorry, I do not understand why the occupants or users of a shared use path are in a more dangerous situation than the users riding right along Route 4.
Route 4?
Parallel to the traffic. I mean, why are I don't understand. I'm not trying to be critical.
No, that's fine.
Why somebody coming out of a driveway is going to be more cognizant of one than the other hasn't been made clear to me.
Okay. There's two situations. First, as you're going out of a driveway, as an example, if you are going out of a driveway and there's a sidewalk next to the road, do you stop at the sidewalk first and make sure no one's on the sidewalk and then proceed to the road? Or do you automatically just go to the road? And typically, everybody just automatically goes to the road. If somebody's walking along there, that's fine, they can usually stop. If somebody's biking along there, they're going faster and they might not be able to react in time, so you have more crashes that way. Whereas if you're on the road, someone has pulled up, they've stopped at the road, and the bicyclist is right there, so they're in the line of sight and the vision of the person and the driver who's looking to get out onto the road, because they look both ways. And along with vehicles coming at you from this side, there will be a bicyclist right there coming at you at the same time. So you're much more likely to see them than if they're back on a shared use path that you don't think about. You go right across it and you go right to the road.
It's more like a habit thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's more like a habit thing. You'd have to get into the habit of stopping at the bike path.
It sounds to me like it's almost a biker problem here, that we're saying that the bikers should go they're in a hurry to get there, so they can just go rushing down without paying attention to what's going on. They need to be careful too. They need to be on their toes and watching for traffic and not just charging ahead with.
And most of the crashes, quite honestly, happen with kids, because they don't have that mindset yet. of stopping there. When you're in a residential situation, it's a little bit different because you do have the same person coming and going on that driveway, and they begin to learn that you stop and look. Whereas in a business, it's new people coming and going all the time. And it definitely, you're right, it's responsibility of both people, both the driver and the bicyclist. But oftentimes, the bicyclist is a younger person that doesn't know yet about that. The second place is if you're trying to get into a driveway. That's the other situation, where you're stopped and you're going to make a left turn across traffic to get into a driveway. When you're there, you're watching those lanes of traffic coming at you and looking for an opening. You're not watching the lanes of traffic and somebody walking or bicycling on the sidewalk or a shared use path nearby. You're only focusing on the traffic. You see an opening, you start to go across, that's when oftentimes you notice there's a bicyclist and the bicyclist might not be able to stop and you can't stop, and that's when another crash happens. Whereas again, if the bicyclist is on the road, they're in your line of sight because they're right there with the cars, so you're seeing them at the same time. So the number of crashes in that situation is far less. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, because just like in automobiles, they happen, but they happen far less than with a shared use path that's just off the road a little bit.
I mean, the question is, when you're trained to drive, where are you trained to look? You're trained to look about 50 feet ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
So your sidewalk is coming up, and you're not trained to look there. So you're looking down the road to scan the area ahead of you.
Right.
So it's not unusual to see something that comes up. I can tell you that as I'm driving through towns sometimes, it's very difficult. I'm looking down the road. When all of a sudden somebody out of the corner of my eye steps into a crosswalk, I can't stop.
Right.
I do not have enough reaction time because I am scanning my field of vision, which I've been trained to do,
It's up there.
50 feet down the road to make sure that I'm aware of something darting out from behind a car or something like that. So the closer it is to you, you've already gone past that. Your eyes and your brain are trained to look further ahead. And that's the phenomenon that you're describing. So by the time you get to that sidewalk, you've already scanned for any concern. And now you're easing out. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's what we're trained to do, and it's almost automatic. So what we're describing is a situation that we don't want to create a conflict in our minds and in the way that we operate. We can say that it's the bicyclist's responsibility, we can say that it's our responsibility, but if we can avoid having the two come into a hectic situation, then that would be the ideal
Right.
solution, so that you're not creating that conflict of security that you're supposed to be monitoring as a motorist.
So Jim, so we're making progress on what we call that a pocket park there along Otter Creek, right down here at the falls. We're very hopeful that a small park will be created there. When that happens, wouldn't a good next step be a shared use path along the Clarendon River, just to extend the recreational opportunities that creates, or not?
I think so. I don't know.
Is a shared use path, is that discussed along that old rail bed or no?
I think most of it is.
We
Which is
did not look
another
really
issue.
closely in here, but the other study did, and they have some recommendations, and those, I think those are the ones you've got here, E1, E2, and F1,
Yeah.
would be great additions initially when you have that to help people get into and out of that park.
Right.
It just seems like it'd be cost prohibitive to do it any other way. I mean, to build a shared use path behind those businesses would be big bucks if the basis for it wasn't there already.
The basis for,
That path, meaning the rail bed. With the rail bed there, I think it makes it maybe even doable with a certain amount, but I think if it wasn't there, I think
Big
the
difference
cost
in
would go
cost.
through the roof.
Okay.
That would be
yeah,
almost impossible.
right.
I haven't walked it, so I don't know how far it goes, I'm not sure. Maybe Mary Beth, you walked that? No?
I haven't, but I'd like to.
Yeah. That would be the time,
Yeah.
before the vegetation comes out.
But then, you have to wonder about the railroad.
Yeah.
What are they gonna want? They have
Right.
trains that are on that other track going back and forth, frequently.
It goes fairly close to
Are they
the
gonna want bikes riding along it? It's a perfect spot, nice and flat, for sure. But there's a lot
I'd
of-
like to, one of the things, I think we talked about it once, I haven't been there to look at it, and when we talk about it, I can't really envision exactly what's there.
Maybe we should do a field trip sometime.
This seems like it would be, make it a lot easier to understand what we're talking about for me.
Yeah. Good idea. So another suggestion of yours was, that ranked pretty highly, was doing a unifying theme along Business Route 4. Is that something that can be connected to what we're talking about now with the park and the shared use path? Or is it something separate? And if it's something separate, how would it ever, I'm wondering how it would ever help or stand out with all of the businesses out there?
I would see it as something that you sort of overlay over everything else. So that as you're looking at the pocket park, you try to use marble as much as you can. As you're doing street tree plantings, maybe you put little marble curbs around them. Anything that you do, look for a way of incorporating marble all the way along the highway. And as you mentioned in here, work with West Rutland for them to do the same, so that you begin to get more. And I can remember the inspiration for that was the retaining wall. That everyone in the team said, we have never seen a marble retaining wall before. That's on the north side of the road over there. And that, somebody said, well, wouldn't that be cool to spread that all up and down the highway? And that's where that came from, to celebrate the heritage of the area. And so I'd say that whatever you do, no matter what, try to incorporate small pieces of marble in it, either marble chips as mulch or whatever, because there's a lot of recycled marble that you can get that probably wouldn't be very expensive to use, and incorporate it as much as you can. But be careful that you're not creating hazards with it. So it's not good for paving, for one. Because that, like all the marble sidewalks they have over in West Rutland, they're really neat looking until it rains, and then they're very slippery. So basically using it within reason, and trying to, say, work with the Marble Works, I'm trying to remember the name, that is in West Rutland.
The sculpture?
The sculpture, yes. To even try to get some artwork in there, or as you're maybe looking at putting street trees along the business route for a few additional marble sculptures, even if they're on loan or something, to have out there for a while.
There's a program in Rutland City, and I believe it's their intention to expand it to the county, for lack of a better word, planting marble sculptures in various places. And there's talk of one on Route 7 now, or just beginning, and there's no reason why we couldn't honor our heritage
Definitely.
with a piece of marble sculpture in front of Town Hall, various places along Route 7, Route 4. So I'm glad to hear that. Actually, as I was going over that, and I've come involved with some people who are very interested and active in this sculpture trail, it occurred to me that it's not a big leap. And the person who's in charge of it, Barbara, is Steve Costello, Green Mountain Power,
Yeah.
and he's always looking for new ideas.
Okay.
Thank you for mentioning that.
And how interrelated would something like that be? A series of displays with a marble theme with a wayfinding system? Are they connected, or are they two
Same thing.
different
The exact
audiences?
same thing. Trying to incorporate marble into the wayfinding system. Even in some cases, maybe it's marble post that identifies where things are, that has the names carved into it that might be painted over time, and as it wears out, you can paint them in again so they're visible from far away. Markers for the signposts that hold up signs, bases that the signs are sitting in. However, you can incorporate marble into that. Again, work to do that. As part of the overriding. Whatever you do, I'd say try to incorporate marble. And so there's I'm sure, lots of other ways people can think about doing that we haven't thought about. You know, we listed a few things in our report, but I'm sure there's many, many more.
So is there a standard or generally accepted guideline for how frequent the trees, what the distance is between trees, or how frequent they are?
25 feet is usually the minimum. And it's typically 25 to 40, somewhere in there. Some places, when they've seen them planted at 25 feet, feel, oh, that's way too tight. They should be further apart. But other communities really like it at 25 feet because, again, it helps to enhance what you're trying to do in the long run, to have the trees closer. But you want to make sure that each tree can grow fairly well and mature, and 25 feet gives each tree 25 feet for spread up in the crown before they start touching.
50.
No, if they're 25 feet on center, then you've only really got 12 and a half feet on either side.
Oh, okay. All right.
If it grows equally.
And just for kind of context, like you can get sugar maples or other hardwood or softwood trees like $4 each, even if we didn't get a grant. I think the main cost is the planting and
Right. But the $4 ones, though, are relatively small.
that's true. Yeah.
What several communities are starting to do is large-scale bare root. And there's a nursery in western New York, Schichtel's Nursery. They are selling like 1-inch and 2-inch caliper trees, so they're like that big. But they carefully wash them off, wash off the roots, and then they become very light, and you can easily transport them. One person can pick it up and plant it because it doesn't have all the weight of the roots. And when you take the time to plant it correctly, the survival rate is like 95 to 100% for those. You're limited when you can get them as early in the spring before they leaf out. So that's the restriction on that. But they also are a little bit less expensive to buy the larger tree because you're not having all the money involved in transporting all that weight that goes along with the root ball. So that might be a way to get more tree for the same budget.
I'm concerned about the methodology of planting trees that you touched on earlier, and how much space you need for the trees and for them to grow properly, and how and where we create that space when we're widening shoulders, and it seems like they're competing with one another.
I wasn't sure we were talking about widening shoulders.
Well,
We're basically, you're reassigning space within the existing shoulders. as opposed to widening. So you're just changing how you allocate that between vehicles and bicycles and anything else. So you're not talking about widening the road. So that you maintain whatever space is out there now, you still have that space
We have-
afterwards.
Sidewalks, and in some places we have grass between the sidewalks and the road and the curb, and other places we don't. I'm just not sure how we put it in. It's probably too technical to get into now, but it is a concern of along here. You know, but to create the space you talk about means digging up sidewalks.
Not necessarily.
No?
If
It's suggested, I'm sorry.
If they're, I have seen street trees planted in 2-foot medians. And in that case, you'd probably take out almost all the soil if it's not a good soil, because that at least lets them start to grow laterally, and then eventually they might begin to go further down under the sidewalk where the soil is better. And if they're behind, if you have a sidewalk right next to the road, depending on where your right-of-way is, you might need to get easements. But you probably want to be at least, say, 2 feet off of the sidewalk, if not more. And if you don't have that much in the right-of-way, then you might need to get an easement to plant them on the properties.
Thank you. I don't want, it's fine, thank you.
So for what it's worth, this sidewalk, for instance, that comes up through here and goes up to Ripley Road, where the furniture store is, there's an 8-inch water main right going underneath that sidewalk. So
Underneath the sidewalk?
underneath the sidewalk. Sidewalk's right on top of it. So I mean, that's something that would play into it when you start, or could play into it. You know, trying to find a spot to put trees and things. I just mentioned it.
And if it's under the sidewalk, that's good. Because in theory, that'll stay solid while you're trying to plant on either side of that sidewalk. If it was in that space between the sidewalk and the road, then you'd have a larger problem of trying to plant, get enough good soil that the tree would grow and yet not disturb your water main.
What is the prospective value, opportunity of putting in a grass median along the stretch of road from here to West Rutland, where there currently is nothing separating the lanes of traffic, and having that a planted corridor of trees in the middle of the thoroughfare?
Based on what I know about it, the chances of that happening are probably very small. There's two things that create an issue for that. There's plenty of space. It could be easily done. How often you want turning lanes becomes one question. And if you don't have a turning lane for every driveway, then you need to create some sort of a turnaround where you can turn around and come back and get into the driveways that you can't access because the median is there. So oftentimes that's why they don't happen, because you can't accommodate either all the turning lanes or there's not enough room to create some sort of a turnaround. And you'll always get pushback from the businesses if suddenly they're the ones without a driveway turn. Or how do you decide which businesses get a turn and which businesses don't get a turn, and it becomes very political. So typically, it doesn't happen.
And you take some of the nice wide shoulder
Right,
away when
Yeah.
you do that.
right.
Does road salt have much of an impact on trees?
It definitely does, and when you do the street tree planting, depending on where you're putting them, that is one of the criteria that you should use in your selection, because the reaction of trees to road salt varies tremendously. And there are some trees that go fine with road salt, and there are other trees that a tiny bit of road salt, they're gone. They just can't take it. And then some of them grow fine with road salt drainage, but they can't stand the spray. I think if I recall, white pines are not good with the spray, and if you see, say, especially along the interstate, the lower parts of pines that are close to the road are usually browned out, and that's from the snow plows and the salt-laden snow hitting them in the winter. They grow fine in the runoff, but the spray kills the vegetation. So always make sure that you're looking at that as one of your criteria when you're selecting what trees to use.
Can I switch topics?
Fine with me.
Well, before you do,
Okay.
should we just talk about the possibility of funding or grants? I mean, if you're gonna go away from trees and this, I just wondered if V-Trans or any other state agency or any place where that you're aware of that would have a grant.
The only one that comes to mind right now is the Urban and Community Forestry
Is that a state program?
program. Yes. The Urban and Community Forestry. There's one last word, and I can't think what it is. It's commission or committee or program or
Okay.
something. But they have a yearly grant program. And I know that some of it is used for inventories, but I believe there are other grants, and they're not large grants, but I'm pretty sure that some of their grants can be used for street tree planting, because they're trying to encourage more urban and community forestry.
Well, what I was wondering is, I know there's also sidewalk funding available in times, and I wonder if you could tie in trees to,
To like complete streets type funding?
Yeah,
That's what,
yeah.
You definitely can, but it has to be
you have to do some
peripheral to the sidewalk project,
Yeah.
so that you can do some plantings as part of a sidewalk project. But you can't just do this planting without the sidewalk.
You probably couldn't fund ripping up the sidewalk.
No.
There's not much sidewalk, is there? Besides out here.
You were mostly talking about out here for the trees.
Yeah, just up until it becomes 4 lanes.
So I was wanting to switch gears just for a minute and talk about mixed use. You know, besides developing more recreational opportunities and maybe tourist stops in Center Rutland, this part of town, we often talk about the business route 4 and getting more different types of businesses, getting, you know, restaurants or stores, or maybe even housing
Right.
along there. So do you think that's still feasible, and what are the best first steps to take when you've got such an industrial area to begin with?
From what I saw in my quick drive, I think it's still feasible. The economic study that we had in there identified that as one of the larger needs. And I saw that, say, for one, the motel was now for sale, which wasn't for sale before. So there are parcels along there that could work, and especially on that side where the topography takes you up higher, those areas could be well suited for residential and not as well suited for commercial because they're not as visual. You can't see them as well. And the topography also slightly removes you from the road noise at the same time. We didn't have a chance to look really closely into what types of mixed use might be viable or workable in that area outside of what the economic study said. Basically, we didn't have time or funding in that project to take the economic study and then look really closely at how that could be applied to any particular parcel or groups of parcels along the corridor. We just identified the need and identified some parcels where that might work.
Would that be a good next step to do that economic feasibility?
And, well, that was part of the, some of the recommendations that we had, were like do a, more of a feasibility study for some of the parcels, I think on the north side, to see how they might be used. My memory was, there's a, kind of a junkyard on one area back there.
Yes.
That's, I remember that, and I thought that area ultimately someday might have some other use. The motel we identified, Florries we identified as mixed use. Most of them were on that side versus the other side of the road, because the parcels were smaller, they're closer to the road, and probably the residential wouldn't work as well in those areas. But on the north side, there seemed to be some.
A lot of it's marsh.
I did note that came out lower on your evaluation.
Which one? We had Flory up there as pretty high scoring.
BR2, BR3, where you have an NA next to them.
Yeah.
And basically what that was looking at was how can you make mixed use work better on these parcels? Do you need to modify your zoning in any way? Are there any incentives that you might be able to put into the zoning regulations?
We don't have
Or,
zoning.
as I was saying that, I was remembering West Rutland had zoning and you didn't have zoning. And part of that was to see how can the town try to create some incentives, if possible, to have some mixed use there, to increase
Right.
residential uses on that north side.
Yeah, and I think those scored low, not because, we didn't see a need for them, or not because we didn't want to take them to the next step, but they scored low because of the criteria.
Right.
The 9 criteria we're looking at. Which we thought was perfect when we developed it, but,
CR2 was NA because we had already done the work. I mean, for that one.
right.
Okay, good.
Yeah, any other questions for Jim? Can we keep you on retainer?
Definitely.
And if you have anything to
As-
leave tonight
As
for me,
things come up, I'd be more than happy to answer additional questions, whatever. Come down and talk to you again. Basically because we always like to see recommendations and studies we've done pursued. It sort of validates the work when the towns want to pursue them. So, and I, as a planner, you probably understand that too. From your work. And then again, as a planning commission, when you plan things and they actually get paid attention to and followed, you feel better. Having been a member of our planning
sometimes
commission.
we feel a little ignored, but overlooked.
I do on TV.
I know. I'm trying.
Our town did not adopt the DRB model, so we kept our planning commission as the one that basically does all the reviews and things. And so while it kept you busy, it also kept you more in the limelight. So in Charlotte, at least, they pay a little bit of attention to the planning commission, just because they also are doing that development review stuff at the same time. And there was a lot of discussion when that first came out, and I don't remember why we decided not to. But I think everybody in the town is kind of happy now because they've seen in other communities, and I'm not saying this is what's happening here, but they've seen some where the planning commission doesn't carry as much weight anymore as the DRB, and the DRB kind of takes over everything.
Okay. If you have
So-
any paperwork, you can just leave it at the desk.
Okay.
there.
But seriously, I'm more than happy to answer for additional questions, if you have any more. And I will see what I can find in terms of funding, and I'll get those back to Barbara. For pretty, the things that are in your tier 1 and tier 2. And sometimes there's funding that is not public funding as well that could be available. And specifically, say, street trees, the Arbor Foundation, Arbor Day Foundation, I think at times has done grants for tree planting. And for, say, the park and some of your recommendations there for E1 and E2, and I think it's F1, oftentimes health organizations will give grants for those because it begins to encourage active lifestyles. And that's one of the things they're trying to encourage. So I'll see what else I can find out there.
Oh, thank
in
you.
addition to just things that the state of Vermont might have. Because it expands the pool of places you might be able to go for money.
Great.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you. I'm very glad that you're interested in continuing on with these things.
Well, some of them are
Appreciate
just almost like no-brainers,
Yeah.
you know, for this area. So it's time to revisit some of them.
Great. Thank you. I
Thank
just had
you,
a call
Jim.
from Stowe in Morrisville. I did a study there a few years ago, and just at town meeting day, it came up again, and they're like, we're revisiting this again. So it's
Okay, yeah, give us a little time.
Yeah,
We'll-
it takes time.
Okay, that clock is driving me nuts, but. It is working. Okay, and that one's correct, right?
But it's not even right once a day, that one.
Okay. So, let's quickly just go through, the rest of the agenda. The Act 250 application, it's nothing we need to do anything on. It's just for your information. The rec department is, thanks, Jim, is interested in putting in a new storage facility at Northwood Park. And they're calling it cold storage because it's not going to be heated. It's just going to be a shell of a storage facility, as I understand it. So that's going through the Act
Okay,
250
thank you.
process, if anyone wants to review that.
And it's large,
It's not that big, but we're a 1 acre town because we have no zoning. So I assume because Northwood Park is larger than 1 acre, that anything that goes on up there triggers Act 250.
How big's the building, you know?
Oh, I forget, well, probably not very big, 20 by 20 or something.
You might as well build it big enough to go through all this effort to get the permitting and build it and have, that doesn't really matter if I already.
It's a minor
Yeah, they haven't
probably
really
a
looked.
minor application also.
That's fine.
you buy one and bring it in.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Act 250s to know where to turn to there. So that's that. We do have going down to the Rob Shawn Place agenda item, we do have a Mylar from them that I'm planning on signing. If anyone wants to take a look at it, it's right there near Sherman, right next to him. If anyone wants to look at that before you go, that's where it is. A little awkward to kind of pass around.
Have you taken a look at it, and does it look like it meets the specifications we requested?
I haven't. Bill's probably taken a quick look at it. Howard, have you looked at it? Okay, if you would before you go.
Put it over here where it's easiest.
Howard,
Yeah, we can look at it.
let me get it after he looks.
That's okay.
And so they got their state permit. So that's why we can sign the Mylar now.
They got the subdivision permit.
The wastewater system and portable water supply permit, yeah.
What is it dated?
What is it dated?
Only because we don't want to sign it till the appeal period is expired.
I saw it was recorded in the vault. We'll see if there.
Okay. It's in there. I hate to be picky.
Yeah, you really.
Oh, not really.
looks like February 28th, 2020.
Could be, because it's something fairly new that came in.
And this McAllen, oh, this is the permit as well. And in this envelope,
Just the rest of the, it's just the rest of
Option, I was
the,
coming back from someplace to,
okay.
down Post Road.
Yep.
And so I looked back,
So we'll take a quick look at the Mylar.
I don't see anything there.
And you folks remember, you're on TV. Camera. Good night, Jim.
Good luck. Thanks for coming.
When did we first look at this,
Separate price.
Barbara? Was it November?
November, December,
what's the date on the front of the envelope?
This is one of the parcels that comes out of it right here. Like 80.
November 13th.
It's really just two
I
pieces,
got
I
it,
think.
so.
But it was contingent on them getting the permit, remember, Dana?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just remembering, I'm just looking for the first time, because
Oh, okay.
I'm checking my phone for my highlighted, marks. That's my
Oh,
reference.
yeah, this really goes downhill steep
Yep.
here.
13th, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, can we just,
Which house it ends on, right here?
hey, Norm? Can we keep it brief over there and just,
Okay.
I've seen what I need to see, I just wanted to see what it
Okay.
looked like.
thank you, I'm sorry, just,
I just happened to be on it today. I was riding by and decided to take a look.
Dana, you good with the map?
I think so.
School all day. He's exposed.
I'm exposed all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might as well.
Let's move down to announcements. I guess I want to apologize for not having a remote option for tonight, if people are concerned about the coronavirus. We hope to have a better plan for the next meeting, and I'm sure the select board will be talking about it next week. But it's perfectly legitimate, to have people call in or whatever, so we'll figure something out. Not having a phone line in here is going to make it a little bit difficult, but
Well, if we're all calling in, doesn't have to be in here, it could be in Bill's office.
Right, one person has to be here.
Right.
yes,
Everybody has to be on the
Right.
phone.
right. Right, and it still has to be posted, and the public can still come in. We can't keep them, out, so it gets noticed, and then we have to make it available for them to come in. So we'll figure that out. As things progress with this virus, we'll need to figure something out. Anything else that anyone wants to mention? We'll go down to the minutes from the last time, from February 20th.
Had a couple typos on the second page. Sure you got them also.
Got
Motion
two.
to approve the minutes.
Paragraph 3.
Second.
First bullet.
Okay. So number 3
First bullet,
should be valid.
I guess it should, doesn't make sense. The application had approval valid. Doesn't make sense either.
Had approval, valid for 90 days. And it's been more than that.
Oh, yes, okay.
Okay.
And has been, and you need another L on well. Has been
Sorry,
well
where-
more.
Where's that well?
That same sentence.
3 first bullet.
It's got 2 L's. You want 3 L's on that
Mine
one?
only has, I don't even, oh, I know what it is. I don't think you need well. It's been more than. I circled it, covered up the other one, but it,
Okay.
This
Okay.
hasn't
It's
been more than that.
Approval valid for 90 days, and it has been more than that, yes.
Okay.
I think that was taken from the conversation, that's
Yeah.
what was said, so that's why I put
I'm
it.
sorry.
That's what was said, I agree, but that's what was said, so that's why I put it there.
Okay.
Well, let's leave it in then.
You can leave it if you want. There's no,
What about the first line of number 3?
In other words, much more than the 90 days. Got it.
the first line meaning,
Isovolta recently brought.
yeah, oh, I missed that, yeah, excuse me,
Yeah,
maybe.
brought a miler. So just
Slipping,
missing
Nora,
a T.
Slipping.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay. Dana, you made the motion?
I did.
And I seconded it.
I was reading something in my mind several times. I think it's okay.
So you'll,
So I'd amend my motion to accept the minutes as amended, as corrected.
A second.
okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I don't have anything else.
A motion we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.